All that said, speaking of end-to-end, another big announcement, which I thought was interesting because it speaks to some of the need for, but also challenges with going end-to-end. On the complete other end of the spectrum, on the AI chip side, and there was an announcement by AMD that they were buying a Finnish startup that I haven't heard of called Silo AI, um, specifically to compete with NVIDIA. But what was interesting about this from my perspective is that Silo is, in fact, their aspiration is to be a foundational AI LLM. And unlike NVIDIA, which is basically providing chips for those foundational LLM players, I'm not sure what this means. If AMD is trying to become an end-to-end provider and decides their best way to compete is by effectively having what amounts to proprietary chips that are, for their own LLM, or are they looking at this as a proof of concept? Are they looking at selling this as a service? All that's unclear right now, but it is a market departure from the strategy that NVIDIA is currently using, but certainly speaks to the fact that software is becoming just as important even in the chip business, as the hardware. And so I think it's really interesting. I'm not sure what your take on this was.
Yeah, I found this interesting because I feel like in the IT world, chip companies have always tried to talk about themselves as being focused on the business and helping IT teams with specific goals. But at the end of the day, we always just saw them as chips. Like when you look at Intel or traditional AMD or any of the stuff in the data center, and you think about the chip, the chip is just the hardware and there's nothing else associated with that. And Intel tried to make some gains into software, but never really got seen as a fundamental software player like, oh, IBM, SAP, Oracle, Microsoft, the ones that we really care about as our key software players. And so from a software and services perspective, these chip companies are all trying to figure out how to be more relevant. And Silo AI is relevant. They've got 600 people. They've done hundreds of AI projects on behalf of enterprises, and they have experience building their own models. So this allows AMD to really have a professional services team now that is able to help companies with custom model building, as well as to help sell pure AMD at a time when NVIDIA obviously is making big news all over the place, and where Jensen Huang is literally at every tech conference, teleporting using Star Trek technology to go from stage to stage, right? He's everywhere. So it's hard to fight against that. And I think these chip companies are really being pushed to actually deliver on the services and the software capabilities that they always talked about doing for so many years.
Yeah, no, I think it's. I mean, you joke. I guess you weren't joking, but about how the chip companies have never really they've struggled to become more than chip, and it's true. I mean that's why the Intel Inside was such a brilliant. Finally allowed you to kind of get your head around this idea that there was this chip that maybe you should care about on the inside of it.
Mhm.
I mean, clearly we've seen across the spectrum, certainly AI, personal computing with Apple making their own silicon. I mean, the hardware and the chips have become much more important in this era, and yet I think it remains difficult if you're an enterprise CIO to care that much about it. It's so abstracted away that it is difficult. And so I do think this is, AMD was just losing the battle of any relevance in this conversation. And so I think this is a smart move from their standpoint, particularly because it allows them, because to your point, they're not going to compete on the macro level, at least not right now. And so this allows them to be much more targeted by now having this company with some technology and with some smart people to be able to go and target enterprises and getting them to move over into their architecture. I think it's a smart move. I think that's what you always need to be looking for, to put a stake in the ground and differentiate. Pick the battles you can win. And the challenge with NVIDIA's customers are going to be forever. Well, maybe not forever, but at least for the foreseeable future, the big giant foundational LMs, the
Mhm.
OpenAIs, the Microsofts of the world. And that's it. So if you're an enterprise who's trying to play, but you're not going to compete there, then suddenly you now have an option. And I think that's smart. So I like this. I think it's a good move. I think it's also, ironically enough, I think it's going to put some pressure on NVIDIA. So I'm excited to see that.
Yeah, and we've seen from the likes of Databricks and other data science companies that you can build these, call it 2 billion parameter models that are often just as effective as current open source and publicly available models that are much larger if you're trying to do a specific task. And for those Fortune 500 companies that are trying to create a custom capability, maybe you literally can't get NVIDIA GPUs because they are all sold out to Meta, Microsoft, and Google. And so you can't literally get these chips. You can go to AMD and at least run your model and go into production with their ecosystem. And that might end up being more important over time.